next speaker is General David Perkins. He currently serves as the commander of the U.S. Army Training and Doctrine Command. Previous commands have involved serving as the commanding general of the 4th Infantry Division in Iraq, transitioning security responsibility from the U.S. to Iraqi forces. Prior to that, he served as the brigade commander for the 2nd Brigade, 3rd Infantry Division Mechanized during the invasion of Iraq, commanding the unit's Thunder Run into Baghdad, and subsequent to that, stability operations in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. He has also had significant leadership positions in Europe, the United States, and the Middle East. He is a West Point grad. In addition to West Point, his formal education includes a master's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Michigan and a master's degree in national security studies and strategic studies from the Naval War College. General Perkins.
Well, thanks, and again, to all the folks that have taken time to come out and take part in this, to all our guest speakers, and again, to William and Mary that have proved already to be great hosts. I always tell folks I was out at Leavenworth last week, or actually yesterday, talking on pre-command course. I said one of the things that leaders have to do, they have to contextualize their environment and level expectations. So in following my own advice, first on leveling expectations, I'll talk briefly here, but I will not be nearly as eloquent as the Vice, not nearly as insightful as Michael Hanlon, and I have no data to back up anything I'm saying as Barry had. So already leveling expectations, although after Barry's discussion and who's invested the most in R&D and innovation, it's now clear why I've been chosen to be the TRADOC commander, which has remained a mystery, I know, for most people in the Army, because the first vehicle I ever owned was the 1968 Volkswagen Bug. And since they are leaders, I guess, in innovation investment, maybe that's a method to the madness. Well, so talking to H.R. McMaster, he said, "Sir, we're going to have all these guest speakers. We want the Vice to kick it off, and then right before lunch, we want you to come up and kind of, give some homework assignments to people so they can produce deliverables at the end." So basically saying, "Sir, you don't need to be insightful. You don't have to paint a big long-term picture. You just have to give us homework," kind of like our 5th grade math teacher. So I said I can do that. And so what I'm going to do is kind of give you some ways to think about what will be useful as we kind of move forward the next couple of days here and we go to the breakout sessions, because, as they say, TRADOC is the architect of the Army, but I also remind folks TRADOC is kind of a design-build firm. So we design the future of the Army, but we also build it. We go out and assess the Army, we send everyone to school, we build it, we do the doctrine, et cetera, like that. And so I tell folks what we have to do. One of the jobs of TRADOC is not coming up with ideas only, but turning ideas into reality. And so what I'm going to do to you all is kind of task you with help me turning some of the good ideas into reality. And one of the ways we do that is so that, former armor officer like myself, I sort of have to bin things in digestible chunks, so that I can take an idea and work with the leaders of the Army and you all to actually turn it into reality. And so what I'll do is, again, so that I don't get lost in my own math here, talk about groups of threes. I'll initially give you sort of 3 ways to look at this with 3 subcomponents, and then the second category will be 3 other ways to maybe turn it into reality. So the first thing is you work into your breakout sessions. It will help me turn this into reality. If you're taking a look at innovation and change, if you take a look at it from, hey, short, medium, and long term. Now, people always say, well, of course, everything has a short, medium, long-term aspect. But I'll kind of hopefully contextualize that into why is it short, medium, long-term? Because a lot of times you think, well, short is we'll fix the platoon, and then medium is we'll fix the company size structure, and then long-term is we'll work on the brigade. So we tend to look at short, medium, long-term with regards to size of the unit we're going to work with or how much we're going to spend. We'll start off with $1 million, then $10 million, $100 million. But that really, as I think Barry laid out very well, generally almost has nothing to do with whether it's short, medium, or long term. Really doesn't have anything to do with the money, the size of the organization. It's really a compilation of a lot of things. So in the end, we still have to think short, medium, long, but there's, I think, other reasons why. So the first reason we have to kind of think through, quite honestly, is the money aspect of it. I mean, money has an impact to it. It is not the end-all and be-all, and I think sometimes, quite honestly, in the Army, we get overly consumed with it. I know that's heresy to my friends in the Army staff that are still here, or those that sort of drafted with the vice in and out of here. But it is a reality that we have to deal with. So I would say kind of bin that into three categories. The first category, I believe, well, the GH just left Tony, but I believe it's a doctrinally correct category of the free chicken category. Now, having gone to NTC when General J.D. Thurman was the CG at NTC, you know, to always say, hey, look, you know, there's no free chicken out here in the desert. You've got to, you know, everything's got a price to it. The good news is we're not in the desert. So actually, there's probably a lot of things that are sort of kind of in the free chicken category that really is not a function of money, or at least not a lot of money, on how we can go about it. The next category is what, from a monetary point of view, is sort of kind of within the palm already. Because, you know, as I visit the Pentagon often and talk about new ways of doing things, usually they generally don't say it directly to my face, but I can read their body language, whatever, like, this guy's never been on the Army staff, he doesn't understand how things work, he's a brand new 4-star, let's just wait a while. So I understand that, I get it, and I've never been on the Army staff. I don't know how the POM process works, et cetera, like that. But I know that if you can do it within the POM, it's easier than having to change the POM. Then that's all about, I probably need to know about the POM process at this point in time. So the first category is the free chicken category. The second one is, what is it that you can do within sort of the current plan that we don't have to change it because Perkins doesn't understand how hard it is to change, because every time he comes up here with ideas, it involves a lot of change. And obviously, if he had served on the Army staff, he wouldn't come up with these crazy ideas because they involved a lot of change, and that takes a while to do. And it costs a lot of money. So again, number one category, free chicken. Second one is, what is it that you could do within the POM process without massive change? And then the third one is, what is it that would take significant expenditure or significant change? So those are three distinct categories, which quite honestly, those categories, hopefully you see, may relate back to hopefully the sort of short-term, mid-term, and long-term. And so you can kind of bin it from that point of view. And then the other one is kind of an echelonment of change, but not echelonment of, well, we'll do, you know, company teams first, and then we'll do combined arms battalions and eventually brigades. But echelonment with regards to, and kind of keeping in mind as we're bidding short, medium, long term, is what are those things we can do within the Army? Literally, it's just us, you know, pretty much the folks that are in this room with a few of the other folks in senior Army leadership. It's pretty much all an Army decision. We can, you know, and we could do it within regards to sort of getting everyone on the same sheet, kind of like the last presentation we had, that sort of aligning a strategy with a culture. Maybe some of it's just the culture, you know, within the Army. The second one would be, what are the things that, well, you know, just the Army's not going to be able to do it, but we got to get OSD on board, because it either impacts the Air Force, Navy, or their OSD policies, or they are policies and guidance within the Pentagon, that it's not just an Army aspect, but there's an OSD part. And then the other one is literally the ones that will require, as they say, an act of Congress. I get that a lot. Well, sir, you know what? The reason we can't do what you want is because it's against the law. As if that's like the end of the discussion. Well, I mean, you know, Congress passes and changes laws every year. And so too many times that's used as a reason not to do it because that's against the law. Well, then we can have an act of Congress every now and then. They do act. And so if we could sort of, you know, inform and influence our audiences external to our organization, quintessential mission command. And what would be very good is when we go up and talk to our friends on Capitol Hill, we say, we want you to act and change this, but let me tell you already what we've done within the Army, how we've changed our own culture, how we've done this, and let us tell you what we've done for free chicken. We'll have to explain what free chicken means, but we've done this in the short term in the free chicken category within the Army, and then we've gone to OSD and we've worked this for something we can do within the POM, so we aren't coming to you to ask for more money. Now we want to come to you, so we've done a lot already. And now, so we're not just pointing fingers at you, we pointed a lot of fingers of ourselves, et cetera. And now we're coming to you that we want you to kind of get on the team and work with us in all three categories, in all three sort of temporal issues of time here. And actually that would, looking at it that way, it'd be very useful, at least for me. So since HR said my job is not to be eloquent or insightful, but to give you homework, I want to get something out of this, which is to take care of some things that are in my inbox. And if you can actually give the homework back to me in packets like that, then I can actually maybe move forward and get them done. And so now, after you take a look at things like that, what I would say is after you come up with short, medium, long term, you look at it from a money point of view and what echelonment we do, then I would ask you to kind of then continue to bin those in other bins. And the three areas I would put it would be sort of easy, hard, and harder, okay? Or easy, hard, hardest, okay? Now, what you'd have to go back to, and again, it's not just maybe some of the easiest things may do, who knows, maybe changing a law actually may be easier than getting more money or something. I think a lot of times people think right away, well, obviously changing something inside the Army is going to be easier than changing a law, but maybe not. So don't confuse an echelon of change with being easier or harder. It just depends on what kind of pushback you get, the magnitude of change, et cetera. So these are all separate ways of looking at the problem. Too often we just think if it costs a lot of money, it's going to be hard. Maybe one of the easiest ways to do is to make a case for a lot of money for one kind of thing. So don't get trapped into the mode that something free, internal within the Army is easy. Because I can think of a lot of things that wouldn't cost much that we could do within the Army that have already proven to be very difficult. So again, I would just bin them in ease, harder, and hardest, and then using all of the metrics I used before that. Then the other thing I would say is look, we talk about innovation, and a lot of times we do kind of focus on the material aspect, because we've talked about already the number of weapon systems that have been canceled over the last number of decades, how much money we spent on R&D and didn't get anything for. So apparently the Army is the T at spending a lot of time, spending a lot of money and getting nothing for the time and money invested. So we do tend to focus on that because it's measurable. But I would tell you what actually I'm more interested in is step back a little bit from that. The first one is in operational innovation. How do we operationalize whatever capability the Army has? How do we tackle some of these issues that Michael talked about when he talked about threats and adversaries? Different ways of using what we have. As I will acknowledge, there's many definitions of innovation, but one is taking what you have already and using it differently. So we tend to overlook the operational application of our forces. I don't just mean force structure. Well, we used to have 50 brigade combat teams, now we're going to have 40. That's innovation. No, that's just reduction. So how are we going to employ our forces differently? The other one is innovation of our processes, and we've had discussions about that. How do we think about these things differently? How do we get this merger of strategy and culture? How do we change our processes? So I think there's the innovation of our operational techniques on the battlefield, how we use the Army, how we use part as a joint force, how we use it as the foundational joint force, how we use it to develop, how to deploy and synchronize all elements of national power. Then how do we innovate our processes? And then the last one is, and I own a big chunk of this, the institutional part of it. As we look at, and the human domain is a great example of that. So how do we innovate what we are doing with our people from an institutional point of view, from leader development, from accessions, who are we bringing into the Army, how do we bring them in? How do we develop the individual capacity, collective capability, et cetera? So those three categories they're not material focus centric, but they're really what we do to get material, what we do to use material, and again, kind of what we do from an institutional point of view. And then once you've solved all those problems, now the last problem is the one I'm almost interested the most in. As I tell folks, what I'm very interested in is a strategy to get a strategy. Because I tell folks, and so recently, having served out at Leavenworth, you go down to Sam's and they'll get a great strategy, ends, ways, means, and et cetera, like that. And so when we talk about innovation, and I will focus on acquisition as an example, people like that, they'll come back to me and we'll have a seminar and talk about it, and then basically the takeaway will be, and sir, what we need to do is streamline the acquisition process. That's our recommendation. Okay? And we need to reduce the time it takes to buy something as well, and we need to do it with less money. So that's our recommendation. And I appreciate that, But the problem is and so if that's our strategy, well, we're going to reduce this and get more for our bigger bang for the buck for that, and we're going to, as we just talked about here, we're engaged, the end item user is going to be more engaged with the product developer, et cetera, like that. Okay, we're going to do that. So here's the strategy, the ends, ways, means. What I really need, and in large bureaucracies, this is the most difficult part, a strategy to make that strategy a reality. So I have the strategy of sort of the nirvana of innovation, how the Army is going to reach these new heights, and it all sounds great. The problem is ever getting that to fruition. How do you make that happen? So I really need the strategy to make a strategy. You say, well, okay, so then you have to look at ends, ways, means of the strategy to make a strategy. And then you got to take a look at the means, which then sometimes becomes, okay, who is the coalition you build? We have stakeholders in Congress, you have stakeholders in industry, you have stakeholders on the Army staff, et cetera, like that. How do you get buy-in? Do you start with the pilot, the coalition folks? In other words, how can we take this great strategy, which I know you're all going to come up with in the next day and a half, of how the Army gets to the nirvana of innovation, but then literally from quite honestly, a bureaucratic point of view, how do we make that happen? There's all kinds of studies. I'm reading them now. You know, since I've become the trade op commander, people are very gracious with their ideas to me. And, you know, Dave, take a look at this. We've looked at this. We've looked at this. And there are all these great things, but they never happen. So, you know, it was this great strategy. It never came to fruition. You know why? Because there was no implementation strategy to make it reality. It just kind of figured, well, I'm going to do this report, this big book. I'll throw it on the table and assume it will just happen. And that's the problem why these things have really never happened. Not that they were bad ideas, but there was never a strategy to make the idea reality. And that's what I really need a lot of help on. And then the last thing is, because we love to measure everything in the Army and have metrics for stuff, if we have the strategy to get a strategy to achieve nirvana innovation, how are we going to measure that? What are the metrics? Now, here is my sort of my experience with metrics. My experience with metrics is they are horrible at actually measuring things that are useful and giving you true insight. They just don't do well at that because we generally really don't understand well enough the interplay of everything that goes on. But metrics are absolutely a great sort of engine for one thing, and that is to drive activity. Because I tell people, if you put a bar on a chart and put somebody's name or unit on it, everyone will say, what do I have to do to make that bar green? Okay, everyone wants their bar to be green. Nobody wants their bar to be yellow, and heaven forbid if it's red or black. So if you start measuring something, you will drive activity. So sometimes I would tell you take a look at, if we're going to have metrics with regards to a strategy to get a strategy, think of the things that we need to measure, maybe not necessarily to determine how well we're doing, but what things do we measure to drive activity? Because when you try to measure how well you're doing something, usually it's almost always a bad measurement. And then you either have a false sense of security that you're making progress, or you then focus on the wrong thing because you're measuring the wrong thing and it's red. And so my experience tactically and institutionally, et cetera, like that, is that we usually come up short on measuring the right thing, but I just have noticed, being an observer of life, that as soon as we start measuring something, things start happening to the thing that we are measuring. And so I would say use the principle, sort of Perkins 101 principle of metrics, in that mode. What do we want to start happening, and how do we come up with some measurement to force it to happen versus focusing on probably a measurement of something that will give us, at best, a false sense of security. And so that's sort of my homework assignment to you all for the next day and a half. Like I said, not nearly eloquent or insightful, or I have no data to back that up, but it actually helps me with my inbox if you can solve all those problems there. So I'll thank you in advance for at least taking on the homework assignment, and I look, this is one paper I'm looking forward to grading. So thanks a lot, folks. Appreciate it.